Hi, my name is Andy Schmuckler. The expression, people get the government they deserve, is a famous statement that goes back a long way. And one can see there must be ways in which what the people have in them produces the political situation in their societies. But I think that's a wrong way to understand it. There is a way in which the state of a civilization explains how it evolves politically, and there is going to be an element of whatever it is that's in the people that contributes significantly to what the outcome is politically. It just would have to be true. But the idea that we deserve it is unhelpful. The word deserve, I believe that if I had been born with exactly the genetic endowment of Adolf Hitler into exactly the same world into which he was born. So he, starting from a place he did not choose, entering into a world that would shape him, a world he never chose. It just happened to him and things unfolded through cause and effect. I think that we are the fruit of the world, every one of us. That ultimately that's what it is. The issue of moral responsibility gets real complicated once you recognize that there but for the grace of God go I applies across the board, that we don't ultimately choose what we are at the moment of conception, and we don't choose to structure the world whose influences are going to mold us into the people that we become. So it really is a matter of what if there's a problem in terms of deserving. The problem is that there's something amiss with the people that leads to a less than good outcome. Now, and I don't know whether the word deserving should have any meaning whatsoever in this world, but there's a part of me that wants to believe that all of us creatures who are capable of having a wonderful experience being alive, or of having a really grungy, painful experience of being alive, that it matters. It matters that we understand that what we're dealing with in the human world is what injurious forces have done to make them less than ideal. And you can see, for example, like with the Russian people, or at least I think you can see, that how things have unfolded, say, since the fall of the Soviet Union, that one of the important factors in that was what centuries of history have done to the Russian people. But do they deserve to continue to be punished for a history that made them into people who continually found themselves under tyranny? They didn't necessarily choose what environment they were going to be in. I mean, people don't have control over the way, medieval society goes into feudal society, into kingdoms. People don't necessarily control that. It's people are being affected by the forces that are shaping them. And so if we see defective things going on in the world, as we can see in America in these times. The idea that we right now have the government we deserve. So I hate to think of deserving this. So ugly, so destructive. You know, the people, I feel like I didn't deserve this. But if we identify ourselves as a people that express ourselves through an election, the American people did choose this. That in a sense, they really should have known, not necessarily in detail what's going to happen with tariffs and food rotting that could be keeping people alive. It's not just they should have known. And apparently they didn't know that Donald Trump, for example, was hugely disqualified from being president because we already knew that he would do things of this sort and that sort and this sort, and he was only getting more extreme in all that. So something was amiss with the American people, so that even though this isn't necessarily the government we deserve, it is the government that the totality of the people ended up bringing us here. And that's one of the things that I think really needs to be asked in a way I don't hear asking. How did it come to be that the America that people my age, for example, grew up in and have lived in, the whole American scene, well, going back, a long way, but certainly since World War II or since FDR's first election, there was a basic health and solidity about the society, not without its strains, but there was not a sense that this ship of state could capsize to this extent. But people don't seem to be asking the obvious question, which is, how did we get to this point? When you're dealt a good hand, it's easier to keep having a good hand. Getting from a bad hand to a good hand is really a challenge. But why weren't we as a society able to take the fairly reasonably healthy democratic society that we had operating for several generations? Why weren't we able to maintain it? That question. Why? I mean, there's also the question, why isn't that being asked? Because it really did not look, even as recently as the first Bush presidency and during the Clinton years, it did not look as though America could ever be a scene for all that we have seen with the coming of Donald Trump. To begin with, as soon as he steps into the political arena back when Obama was president, with the birther lie, all the way up until all the stuff that he's doing now that the American people chose for him to do. Well, chose to give him the power they never should have given him, because it was crystal clear that Donald Trump was a destroyer. I mean, why would people either not see that he was a destroyer, respond to that fact in the obviously morally compelling way that, no, you don't want to give power to evil? I mean, the evil and the destroyer are things you can end up weaving together responsibly. That the essence of evil is that it is a force of destruction. And there is, that's one of the things I try to convey, is that there really is such a thing as a force of destruction. And one of the ways in which it has manifested in America is the America that could elect Donald Trump after everything he had made so blatantly clear was an America that was off the rails in some way. That somehow the fairly solid seeming American public, a whole big segment of people whose grandparents in the age of Roosevelt or Eisenhower were basically good citizens who contributed to a reasonably good whole political system. How did we lose what we had as a culture? And I think that the answers would be good to attend to. There'll be some of the answers will be at the sort of the structural organization of power levels of how well the right was able to, as private forces, wield an empire of political power. Watching what the Koch brothers did, looking at the Powell memo from 1970 or 71 or whatever it was. So there were things like that led to the, let me stop this sound, that led to the organization of something that was going to be pretty good at taking over power because they were so good at organizing things that were leading to the ability of a fairly fascistic and plutocratic, the rule of money and a certain fascistic spirit came to build power on the conservative side of the American divide and take a whole waft of the grandchildren of good Americans and turn them into agents of putting power into the hands of a destroyer. The question then arises, what happened within that part of America to make them go from basically good solid citizen types into supporters for something that was leading to the destruction of what Americans had always agreed made this a great society. Land of the free, freedom and justice for all, a city on a hill. Something happened to break a lot of people with that. And I think so part of the answer is going to be into understanding what's happened to a lot of good Americans, how we lost the aspect of America that made the society healthy in its politics for to a large degree anyway, for a considerable period of time, how we lost that. That happened on the right, but it also happened on the other side of America. In terms of America, I don't like to think that we've got the America we deserve, but we do have the America that the totality of the consciousness of the American people was inadequate to maintain healthy government. And if one side contributed by being capable of being led into a crazy place where we see Trump supporters right now, at the same time, as this force was arising that would lead to this America, the other side of America was not responding to the growing threat that was visible I mean, it was visible to me. I've got a track record going back into the 90s, and then being full time, writing thousands of pieces. That fascism is coming here. I was full time since 2004 for me. It was visible, but liberal America did not see that a destructive force was taking over the Republican Party. And the question should be asked, well, why didn't liberal? And I think that leads to a lot of important dimensions of reality that liberal America isn't sufficiently attuned to, which is what I'm trying to address in my work, A Better Human Story. Liberal America, whose basic way of understanding the world, I think it's a predominant thing, a secular worldview, which means that something like, logic and evidence combined to no dogmas handed down. Also, no big picture handed down, like with the religious point of view. People had a big picture. If you cease to buy the religious point of view, the big picture doesn't make itself. And I think the secular worldview has a hole in its understanding because of how it has regarded a whole bunch of questions about, say, evil. The idea that there would be a force of evil, there's not a conceptual space in the secular worldview for there being such a force. And I think that's understandable because if there were such a force, and I define evil as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human worse. So we are getting something which, whether we deserve it or not, it is an expression of that coherent force that we got to this place. And we got to this place because both sides of the American political divide made a fundamental error. The error that the conservatives were led into was the error of mistaking the evil for the good. They just got turned around. But the error on the other side was that the idea of good and evil as significant categories wasn't on the map anymore. Because, well, what would a force of evil be? Well, I say you can show, and I got a bunch of work on my website actually showing it, that there are ways of seeing that there's a reality about a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken in the human world or make things worse. So we need to supplement the secular worldview to be able to perceive things like what we've got now because of a concept of there being a pattern of brokenness, the concept of there being such a thing that consistently makes things more broken. If you don't have a conceptual space for it, you're not going to recognize when it starts to happen. And here we are now. If you look at everything that this Trump presidency is doing, it makes it crystal clear that there's a coherence about this, that it consistently makes things more broken. Look at all the things you could list that have been extraordinary things having to do with the nature of the Trump presidency, from the nomination of Matt Gaetz to saying that Ukraine started the war, to this Michigasa with tariffs, and Elon Musk taking a chainsaw to the federal government. I mean, you can't look at a single one. Oh, and not allowing any mention of climate change. I mean, every time he chooses the path of destruction. that is a consistent force of brokenness. And I think that it is a reasonable definition of something to call evil. If you look at, if you can see something that that's that is having, through causes and effects, continually sort of damaging things. So what got damaged in America? What got damaged in America? Well, there was that structural thing about the power-driven people like the Koch brothers were way out fighting the people who should have been defending American democracy when it was coming more and more under threat, and when the Supreme Court was getting to be more and more corporatist. There was an unevenness in terms of the struggle for power. And there was an unevenness because the good guys lacked some kind of passion. And you can get into some of the ways in which the secular worldview has not been developed in moral and spiritual depth that would give people the passion to do the work you need to do to defend a democracy against a powerfully capable organizing process of people who represented a very broken way of wanting the world to be. You know, it elevates gangsters basically to positions of power. And that's what democracy versus fascism is about. Are we going to get the worst human beings, the people who are best at getting power, often the worst, or are the best impulses of humans going to be affirmed? And if you don't recognize that there is such a thing as a coherent force operating, where's the passion going to be that's required to fight and defend what's sacred? There have been people doing much the right thing for 30 years or 35 years on the liberal side, but not fighting the fight that needed to be fought, because you could tell from all the ways that the Democrats talked for all those years, while bad faith was rising on the Republican side, and where the issue of trying to do something constructive for the country ceased to be an agreed upon agenda. And the fascistic side was just interested in making use of every situation to see if it could gain more power. While that was happening, liberals were talking about my friends across the aisle. They clearly had not been friends for quite a while the Democrats were still talking that way. There is an aspect of the secular worldview that even though the word deserving, I don't want, because it puts blame when we don't need to deal with blame, nonetheless, there is a moral dimension that is essential here. There is such a thing as good and evil. When you see this destroyer having an effect on the world that it's having, I mean, there's already a lot of effects on the world already for having Donald Trump, including our longtime friends scrambling for how can we protect ourselves now that we've lost the free leader of the free world. And all the additional suffering around the world when they blocked the flow of aid illegally. Showing some kind of, what the hell is that about, that you have that kind of energy to try to block aid from people who are really in need? What is that energy about? Well, look at all this brokenness that has surfaced. How did we get this way? How did we get to having one of America's two major parties become this atrocity and yet maintain widespread public support? I mean, any people with basic American values and any substantial degree of insight into what's going on would have to know that this Republican Party is basically an instrument, a servile ratifier to the will of a person that's shown themselves even more blatantly than people have anticipated in 52 days or whatever it's been, to be a destroyer. Liberal America needs to recognize that there was a failure, and then to recognize that part of the reason, I think an important part of the reason for the failure of liberal America to respond back at the beginnings of Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh, fighting for the hearts and minds of these people who've gotten off into this so crazy a place that they could be enthusiastic for somebody like Donald Trump. I often say that as a radio guy back in the 90s, I dealt with liberal gatekeepers who I was trying to become a bigger presence on talk radio because I could see what Rush Limbaugh was poisoning a lot of people's minds and that liberal America wasn't doing a thing about it. The signs were there. This was a process of poisoning that Rush Limbaugh was doing and Newt Gingrich was doing with their propaganda. And the problem with the consciousness of the other side, the liberal side, the pro-democracy side, is that not that they mistook the evil for the good, but that they no longer saw the world to the extent to which it appropriately should be understood as a place where there's any kind of meaningful battle between good and evil. The religious perspective had provided ways of looking at that. You know, from the Garden of Eden to the wager with over Job and being tempted in the wilderness when Jesus fasts. They provided a way of understanding that there's some operating here in this world. It's some kind of coherent force that consistently works to make the human worse. Had Jesus said yes to any of the evil one's temptations, it would have, the story is implying, and somehow made the world worse. It was part of the redemption of the world that he said he turned down all the temptations. The evil one visualized Eve eating of the fruit with the serpent there. And then the secular worldview doesn't have a way of seeing that there is anything like that, but there is. And if you don't think there's anything like that, then you don't recognize what the Republican Party is becoming as it moves out of the era of Reagan and the first Bush, that 12-year period, that kind of a party, a normal party, a party that is a mixed bag like American parties generally are, into this part being transformed. And the Democrats show the failure to see what was going on, and that's what I hope that my Better Human story can help to correct. At the intellectual level, there is a way of seeing what's going on. It also has an impact here, just like if you go to see Avatar. There's an impact of seeing the destruction being wrought by this military-industrial, greed-driven military, in its quest, willing to destroy everything that's sacred, in its quest for this wonderfully named thing, unobtainium. to feel the passion, to recognize the value of, say, democracy, where power moves from the ground up, rather than fascism, where the power moves from the top down. So, no, we don't deserve this. I like to think that every creature deserves fulfillment. I don't know if I would know how to make a case for that, but I keep coming back to wanting to feeling that that's a case. That if you're going to have the creatures that are going to experience being alive, in some sense, deserve, well, maybe it's still not the right word. The way the world should be is, however, it is possible to make it so that the beings are glad to be alive and not burdened by being alive. Of course, you always get a mix, balance one way or another. I think that every baby deserves to be loved. Every cat that has kittens deserves to have a place where she can be relaxed and get into the loving spirit toward her kittens. Deserve? Let's just say that the world we should be striving for is as much in that direction as we can get it. And to get it in that direction, I think it's valuable to understand that there are certain forces at work in the human world that have been the source of our problem. That beneath all the many things, there has been, ever since our species took a fateful step 10 or 12,000 years ago, there's been something that was inevitable that has been very powerful. And my life's work has been trying to make that as visible as possible to as many people as possible. That book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, the problem of power in social evolution, University of California Press, prize-winning stuff like that. But it's an idea that my whole life got changed by. And what it says is that civilization, which I define as those societies created by a creature that has extricated itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own new way of life. And I do believe that that is the crucial dividing line when we got to the point 10 or 12,000 years ago, when for the first time in the whole history of life, which is over more than 3.5 billion years, we're talking about some thousands of years, for the first time, a creature invents a way of living through gardening, herding, agriculture. It's for the first time, it's a different way of life it's not continuous with a whole ancestral past, which was made by only one evolutionary process, the biological evolutionary process. So that before us, there were these other hominids, and before that, there were these other apes, and before that, there were these other mammals, and it all unfolds in a continuous set of threads, creating ecosystems and species and organismic designs. All one process and all selected for in a way so that the totality of life on Earth somehow works, which involves a selective process for a whole set of regulated interactions. We're dealing with this Trump presidency there's many steps along the way, is a reflection of an inevitable consequence of a creature getting itself out of that whole continuity and creating a different way of life. More different than, say, painting on a cave or having stone tools or something like that, but increasingly, fundamentally changing from a hunting-gathering band to, whatever, villages, etc., and on up. Those are not things that were created by natural selection. And now you've got two evolutionary processes. The biological process that produced the creature that invents its own way of life, and then there is what I say is a destructive force that inevitably arises, because the step into this unknown, this new territory, where these civilized societies aren't going to be interacting with each other in some synergistic way, like predator and prey that stay in balance. No, this is going to be outside of anything that regulates it, which is the whole crucial thing about that step in the history of life on Earth. I mean, you can talk about the beginnings of self-replicating all the way up to going to multicellular organisms. That's a big step. But this is a whole new kind of step when you get a creature inventing its own way of life, meaning going from the order that evolves evolutionarily into the disorder that is inevitable, because there's nothing to regulate their interactions. So you get a war of all against all, and that leads to a destructive force that I sometimes nickname the spirit of the gangster, getting a disproportionate say on how things go. Do people get the government that they deserve? No way. No way. The generations after hunter-gatherers who are living in a situation of pretty benign nature, of a band, doing okay with each other, to get to a place where by the time the full cities arise, this force of brokenness that has to do with what can prevail in the inevitable war against all has created this manifestation of a lot of evil in it. The tyrannies, the enslavements, the tortures, the butchery of cities, the whole ugly picture that what rose there. This is where the bottom of the line about deserving comes. The whole thing about the brokenness in the human world. We don't deserve it. It's what we accomplished was, in a sense, a marvelous thing. There's no way we could have known that we were going to unleash a social evolutionary force, or a war of all against all. Means that what will survive and spread will be those things that can prevail in a war of all against all. That's the consequence of disorder. The rise of civilization inevitably created a brand new kind of disorder. I like to just call it anarchy. It means that each actor, there's nothing above each actor that compels it to act in any way, so it can act in any way. And then it turns out that there's an inevitable process by which certain kinds of things, connecting with the spirit of the gangster, correlate rather unfortunately and profoundly with what can prevail in a war of all against all. So that the spirit of the government of the pharaohs, the government of the emperors in Mesopotamia, that was not a reflection of human choice. That was something that a inevitable selective process would drive things toward. So two things that sort of express the heart of what I think is important and true. One is that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. That ugliness is the consequence of an inevitable systemic force that would arise with any creature. And so any creature on any planet that breaks through, that breaks out of the pattern in which it had evolved, the niche it evolved, and start by inventing its own way of life, will inevitably find itself in the same tormented process that we have because of the destructive force that arose. Humankind has been through something which is a really mixed blessing. Yeah, we dominate the whole planet. Our dominance is enabling us to, some of us at least, to live pretty good lives. You know, at least a lot of the 8 billion are living pretty well. It's my way. The people who needed to America's better values depended on to defend them against something like this that has been rising on the right, didn't have well, at least part of it was didn't have the understanding to recognize that something was taking over the Republican Party, and that something needed to be fought. The moderates left over from the decent Republican Party would have made common cause, I believe, against the thing that was rising in their party. That's what I believe. I think that was visible in the early Obama years. But people on the left have not seen this coherent force that's taken over the right. And that's failure to see the importance of the battle between good and evil. That's the moral failing of the liberal side of our divide. And that corresponds with the other fundamental problem at the level of good and evil getting broken as a culture around that crucial question, when the people on the right start mistaking the evil for the good. They buy the demonization of the enemies of evil. And they think that they're good while they're supporting the people who attack really the people they should make common cause with. A force of brokenness is working here, and it can be traced back. And I invite you to go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, where I have laid out several times in different ways a way of seeing this whole, a way of seeing our situation as human beings, and specifically as Americans in this time of crisis, in a way that puts some things in an importantly different light. That we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, which in itself could fortify us. And that fundamentally what we're up against, and that's the title of that book back there in 2015 before Trump, what we're up against should be seen as a destructive force, and that has implications for how to fight and defeat it. So, abetterhumanstory.org. If you like this, please say so. Subscribe if you want to encourage me. I would appreciate that. But above all, what I want to share is this way of understanding our situation as Americans in this battle to preserve American democracy, and as humankind in our battle to try to get our species civilization in good enough order, and do it soon enough that we find a way of living on this planet for the long haul where things thrive, the planet and our civilization, because the alternative is we're going to destroy ourselves. And I don't think we have a whole lot of generations before we get there. And so at the age of just about 79, I'm still doing everything I can to get out there, a way of understanding things that give us a better view of the battlefield and how it, and what it is we're up against and how that is best to be fought. Thank you. Bye-bye.